Today I have the distinct privilege of chatting with Pat Schroeder, who represented Colorado's 1st congressional district in the United States House of Representatives for 24 years. I want to mention that she attended Harvard Law School in the 1960s, one of only 15 women in a class of more than 500 men. After earning her law degree in 1964, she moved to Denver, and her husband James in 1972, as I understand it, encouraged her to run for Congress. She did. She won, and with 2 young children at the time she was elected, went on to serve 12 terms. Representative Schroeder, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to share your thoughts with us today about public leadership. Tell us about that first bid. What really inspired that first bid for Congress for you?
Look, I had a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. I had never thought about running for anything, including a bus. And he was on a committee looking for someone to run. It was the year that Nixon was running, and Nixon actually carried my state by 28 points. So anyone who knew anything said, "Oh, no, you don't run." And Jim said, "Oh, you'll never win, but no one else will go out there and articulate the issues. And you really can't just let them have it all. You know, somebody's at least got to talk about the other side." So he kind of shamed me into it. I was teaching at that time, and he said, "You're telling all your students to do these things. How can you take a pass?" So I got talked into it, and then the rest is history.
He made a really great case, and I couldn't agree more with him. So when you entered Congress in the 1970s, did you have any idea what kind of representative you wanted to be? Did you have any role models at the time?
No, not really, because there really weren't any women role models, really. There were some women who were there. Half of the women who were there, and there were only 15, were widows. They had taken over their husband's seat after their husband had died.
I see.
And the dean of the women, I love this, I would go over and sit down and say, "I'm Pat Schroeder, and I know you're the dean, and what should I call you?" And she'd say, "My name is Mrs. John Sullivan." And I said, "Well, I know that, but what should I call you?" "Well, my name is Mrs. John Sullivan. I am not just a woman." "Okay, you're not just a woman." Well, I guess that's the end of that conversation, and that was.
Follow.
So it was, it was thank goodness I'd gone to Harvard Law School where I was so outnumbered, because it was really an amazing time. They just were not exactly female friendly anywhere.
Yeah, I can imagine that. So what, I would imagine to a large extent you were learning how to be a member of Congress by being a member of Congress. How did that true education take place?
Well, you suddenly realize that you're not going to be welcome there, and you're not going to have a mentor, because they don't really, and I was forever getting policemen threatening to arrest me, saying, "You're impersonating a congresswoman or something," and I'd say no. I'd have to pull out all my stuff and say, "No, I really am one." There were days when you got very tired of that, but I always felt, well, look, I never thought I'd be here, and so I'm going to do what I think is right and just go at it at 100 miles an hour. And if I get defeated, fine. My nice life at home in Denver will come back, and this insanity will end. So,
that easy life at home with two young children,
yeah,
right?
But it was certainly a lot easier to juggle than what was going on.
I hear you. So after serving 24 years in the House of Representatives, surely you've come to some conclusions. What does good public leadership look like? What are the attributes of a good public leader?
I think, unfortunately, we're seeing the wrong attributes right now. I mean, being a good public leader, you really have to understand that the genius of the Congress is that you're going to have all sorts of different opinions, because this is a very big and a very diverse country. And that somehow you're all going to have to sit down and work it out. And nobody's going to get their way. Nobody gets to be the 2-year-old that throws the tantrum. Unfortunately, now we've just got a lot of 2-year-olds throwing tantrums, and it's my way or the highway, and I'm not going to hear about it. And I love it, because they love to quote the forefathers and all this stuff. And if they go back and look, the forefathers had some really brutal knockdown, drag-outs, and they all ended up with a government just a little different than they all could have done if we had said, okay, you get to draw the whole thing, you know.
Right.
And somehow we've gotten that all mixed up in our general awareness of what's happening. And I do think you just really have to go and you have to advocate vigorously what you care about, and don't name call. That's the other thing that's going on now. There's much more name calling than there is advocating. But then you also have to listen to what the other people are saying and see what there is that you can work out.
You mentioned the Founding Fathers, and from my understanding of history, after they would have a particularly hard battle on the floor of the Constitutional Convention, for instance, they would all meet at the tavern afterwards and
Absolutely.
and kind of smooth things over a couple of beers. And it seems that with some of the rule changes, that doesn't happen quite as much as it used to be, or as much as it used to, I should say.
No, I mean it used to much more when people were in Washington longer and they knew each other. But there's this new thing about you come into Washington and the whole idea is Washington is rotten and contaminated, and you spend as little time there as possible and you try to blow it up. It's kind of a new form.
And then you hightail it back to your district.
Exactly, legislative terrorism, you know.
Nicely put. So are there any public servants you currently admire? Or do we have to go back in history? Okay,
no,
there are some we like.
Many, and that's the tragedy. There are an awful lot of very good people trying to make things work, and their frustration level must be off the charts. I mean, the main reason that I decided to retire in 96 was that up until then, I have been able to get things done. And when Newt Gingrich came on board, it became very clear we were going into this polarized thing. And I began to feel like that I was in a junior high lunchroom with just one huge food fight going on. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to spend my time doing this. This is too hard. The whole idea that you go home and clean up, go to bed, get up the next morning, go back and do the same thing all over again without getting anything to the outbox is not where I'm going to go. And then, after Newt Gingrich, we had several other speakers that were even worse. So the best thing I ever did was walk out of there, because the frustration level of the good ones who really came to try to make a difference must be just off the charts.
You know, I see a lot of parallels with the teaching profession in that we really need good young people to be entering the teaching profession, just like we need really good, smart young people to be thinking about public service. But how do we convince them that that's a good idea, a good life choice?
Exactly. No, exactly. And that's really true of almost every profession in America right now. I think there's a big, and it's probably my generation that's doing it more than anything. I can go to a wedding in Denver and I will see the young people all walk around. People my age will go over and say to them, well, what are you thinking about doing, or what are you doing? And no matter what they say, if anybody my age who is doing that overhears it, they move in and say, oh, you don't want to be a doctor. Oh, let me tell you how. Or you don't want to be a nurse, or you don't want to be a lawyer, or you don't want to be a teacher, or you don't want to be a... And I begin to think, so what do we want them to be, And, part of the whole thing is, when you go back and look at history, nothing has ever been perfect. That's the whole deal. You get in there and keep trying to make it better. But somehow we've got this new thing that you only pick the perfect profession, and if there is one, I haven't seen it.
Me neither. Me neither. I think it might be our obsession with happiness over, say, fulfillment or meaning. That might be part of it.
I don't know what it is. It's a very interesting philosophical question. And the other piece is, I always say to young people, my generation was different. We had the Vietnam War going on, which we were angry about. We had Watergate going on, which we were angry about. We had 73, the war broke out in the Middle East, which could have gone nuclear in 10 seconds. So all of those things were very, very very strong. Those are huge issues, lots of division, people all over the place on it. And yet our attitude was you roll up your shirt sleeves and you try and wade in there and do whatever you can. Instead, I see people just kind of wringing their hands saying, oh, this is so terrible, I don't want any part of it. Well, okay, then you're deferring to the people who
We do want to be in charge of it. So what do you say to a young person who is considering a life of public service? Other than, are you crazy?
No, I don't say, are you crazy? I say it's a wonderful service. It's a wonderful way. And there's all sorts of things. They'll tell me, oh, but they'll just savage me. And I always say, just tell the truth. And that's the end of the whole story. The people who get in trouble is when they say, oh, I didn't do that. And then, the media, their nostrils spread out. They can sniff that something, and away they go. So, really, most people are very understanding if you tell them the truth. And they're also understanding if you say, this is where I am on this issue, maybe I don't know everything. So tell me what you know that I don't know that might change my mind, or whatever. But the whole idea that to be afraid of it is crazy.
That's very good advice, and it's advice I haven't heard yet, so thank you for that. Last question in one word, what does citizenship mean to you?
Responsibility.
I like it. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Thank you. Good luck to everybody.
Yeah, thanks.